some of the best winemakers I know are almost zen in that they spend so much time in the vineyards to get the grapes absolutely how they want them to be. And then they very carefully handle them coming through. They almost, then want them to express themselves. So it's a very it's definitely art. It's definitely science, but it's also definitely art as well.
Chris, it's so lovely to meet you here on Zoom.
Nice to meet you too, Petra. Thank you.
So you are the director of the Austrian Wine Marketing Board.
That's right. So I joined in the beginning of 2020 as the CEO of Austrian Wine. And before that, I spent 15 years in New Zealand as the global marketing director for New Zealand wine. So I have a bit of a view of the southern hemisphere and also a view of the northern hemisphere, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, that's amazing. But what sparked the interest into the wine industry, or is it more into the marketing industry?
Yeah, I've always been in international marketing. So I've worked in Europe for various international companies. And then I moved to New Zealand and I saw a little advert for a global marketing director for New Zealand wine, which wasn't exporting very much at the time. And I was always interested in wine. I grew up in Switzerland in a wine region and also lived in different places. But so I saw this and I said, I'm an enthusiastic consumer, but I'm not a wine specialist. But I managed to get the job against 100 other people, and I've learned quite a lot along the way. Certainly wouldn't call myself a wine expert, but I do understand how to promote a country's wine around the world.
And it's also maybe because you're not the expert that, most wine drinkers are not experts in wine. So
no,
maybe
exactly.
Understand. Yeah.
That's very true. Well, obviously I have lots of friends who are incredibly knowledgeable, but a very good friend of mine, Master of Wine, he said, there's no right or wrong answer with wine. If somebody likes a wine, it's a good wine. So
Yeah, no, that's true. And I also talked to somebody who talks about the whole, I wouldn't say it's psychology, but it's more of the way we drink wine. It's also associated with the food we eat and the company we are with. So we attach many things to wine. It's not just about the wine in the bottle. It's about the whole experience of drinking the wine.
No, I think it's very true, and I do talk about with our tourism organisations when I was in New Zealand and also here in Austria, which is that at point of consumption, you have a bottle on a table, normally with a group of friends or on yourself, and there's if it's an Austrian wine, it's a premium product. There's from a specific place, and there's normally a little story about the producers, and that's what makes wine very interesting. It's something that it's very hard to get into wine, and it's even harder to get out of wine because the people are incredibly interesting. You have basically farmers who can talk to you about which hotel, which restaurants in Copenhagen and New York you want to be listed in. So you have this breadth of experience, and also people are genuinely interested in, in also discovering other wines, and you do that in the evening. So I always facetiously say, life could be a lot worse if we could be selling cat food.
Yeah. But now Austria has got a very rich and long history in wine. I mean, I didn't realize this, but it's quite a history that they have. So compared to New Zealand, what is the difference for you because Austria is like an old wine country?
Yeah, Austria, it's interesting. So Austria has, like many European countries, 1,000 years of wine history. And 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 the modern wine industry in New Zealand is probably 40 or 50 years old. But also what Austria has is a real dynamism amongst its younger winemakers, and a real focus on quality, a real focus on ecologically sound production. So you sort of have the dynamism of the new world, but in the old world in Austria, and that makes it a very exciting place to be.
But now, how in such an old world wine country, where there must be a lot of tradition, like farms that existed for or changed hands for a few generations, how do they adapt to, say, a new way of farming, or a new way of especially now with organic farming, for instance?
Yeah, so I think, so in terms of organic farming, we probably have one of the highest organic wine farming rates in the world, about 16%, and the highest biodynamic rates within that. And I think part of that's explained by biodynamics, because Rudolf Steiner was Austrian, but also because you had these passing on within the family, then obviously you want to do the right thing for your vineyard and stuff, and therefore a lot of people will argue that organic is the way to go for that. So that's on the one hand, but then there's also which I've learned is, because, and this is probably the difference in the new world, because you're used to passing on from the parents' generation to the younger generation. The parents' generation were young once before, so, and what's important and what they've learned, I think, is to let the younger generation to try out their new philosophy, how they want to approach it. But with a sort of guiding eye, as a parent. So, just as we all know, is quite a tricky balance. But they sort of let the younger ones go off and be quite innovative under maybe a separate label. And then what you then see is it sort of leaches into the mainstream. And through that, you're actually getting very interesting styles of winemaking, and a lot of change. And I think the other thing is also, which is almost unique, is you have these wine schools where the students go at about age 14, 15, quite often in boarding school, so they can focus on viticulture at school for 5 years, and then they create these incredibly close bonds with also other wine students from the country, and they're very much challenging each other to be quite creative, but then they continue to help each other, because they know each other so well. So we've got, there's amazing wine schools, Neuburg and Silverberg in Styria. So I think it's a mix of all those things that makes it quite an exciting place to be.
Well, that's very young, 14, I think, and the interest is there that they go at that age.
Particularly, but we have maybe 7,000 wineries, so a lot of them are small, but certainly there's definitely so wine education is at a very high level here. I'm the CEO of Austrian Wine, but I'm also the chair of the Austrian Wine Academy, which is based in Rust in Burgenland, and which is a very good, advanced level, as more sort of bachelor and master level, and people from all around the world come and do their wine education there. So there's so I think that's a thing that we have in Austria, which is pretty much unique in terms of such a commitment to education.
But now, in this sense, also talk to winemakers and ask about the fact that it's a science, it's a specific science. I mean, there are certain things that are, it's just as it is, but there's also this creative side, this artist, the art of making wine.
Yes.
So what is your feeling about that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you can read, you can read all the books, and I think you have to, because there's a lot of things you can get wrong, first of all. But then it's there's a real philosophy, I think, around what type of wine do I want, what style do I want to make, which drives when you pick your grapes, how you handle your grapes, whether you put them into tank or whether we go into barrel, if it goes into barrel, if it's new oak or older oak, size of barrels, how you ferment. So there's lots of sort of decisions I think you make on the way once you sort of understand the basics of winemaking. I think there's a lot of decisions you make all along the way that affect the wine at the end, and I think the real some of the best winemakers I know are almost zen in that they spend so much time in the vineyards to get the grapes absolutely how they want them to be, and then they very carefully handle them coming through, that they almost then want them to express themselves. So it's a very it's definitely art, it's definitely science, but it's also definitely art as well.
Mm-hmm. But talking about this, also the young winemakers coming into the industry, and is there a lot of experimenting? Because now also with the fact that the climate is changing, is the way of winemaking also now changing?
Yeah, I think there is changes due to the weather and due to climates, that's for sure, and when you pick, and maybe sites that you thought were too cool are now actually nice, and also how you then handle the leaves, etc., in terms of protecting the grapes. I think that's one side, but then there's also the stylistic, particularly the natural wine movement, raw wines, orange wines, skin contact. So there's a whole load of experimentation happening, really going back to the roots in terms of how wine was made 1,000 years ago. And Austrian winemakers are very much, our young winemakers are very much in that scene as well. So I think we're perceived as being some of the best made wines in this sector, and that's sort of, I think, underpinned by having gone through the schools, having parents looking in and saying, well, you can try that, but here's the dangers. So therefore you've got this a real interesting mix between the two, whereas in a number of other countries it's more garagist who are purely doing it like that, whereas a lot of our wines are actually winemakers within a family enterprise where they're also doing more maybe conventional methods as well, and both are interplaying with each other. So I think that's probably the difference. But yeah, so the thing, there's a number of reasons for innovation, certainly.
But now the farms, the wine farms themselves, are they can't be that big? I mean, in a how many, if you said so many wine farms, and I mean, Austria is not the biggest country.
No,
so
no, so they are traditionally
more like boutique,
yeah.
Is it more like boutique wineries?
Yeah, a lot of very family run. I mean, you've got everything starting from, which was the traditional way of, a farmer would have grapes, but also maybe pigs and maybe also vegetables. So they would, at different times, apples, so fruit, and they would sort of make enough for themselves and also to sell some, but also balance their risk a bit. So that's, I would say, the starting point, and then the ending point is, the top 500 wines, 600 wineries are maybe exporting internationally around the world, and then you've got sort of everything in between. And we do have a lot of small wineries, and they are more focused on. We have a whole culture of called Heuriger or Buschenschank, which is basically old wine tavern where you can buy food and the wine from the winery. And that's also so some are just focused on that, and they're therefore very reliant on wine tourism, which is something we focus on a lot as well.
Well, this time of year is this wine route that you can walk between the vineyards and tasting the wine as well, which is lovely.
That's right. Yeah, good fun.
Yeah. But now, because this is such an old wine country, there must be also a lot of old vines.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Europe was obviously had problems, and they had to pull out their vines. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we have, vines up to 70, 80 years old. Generally, vine is actually similar to a human being, sort of in terms of how long it lasts for, and the different stages it goes at. But yeah, and actually what people are finding is some of the older vineyards are also more resistant to drought because the roots are deeper. So absolutely. So there's older ones, and also younger ones, and yeah.
But now this is interesting that the researcher that I talked about, the viticulturist, he said that these, like you say, the old vines are more resistant to drought, and that it's just maybe something to look into, that to preserving these old vineyards, even though they don't have enough fruit as the younger ones, but that it's a way of then looking in the future of sustainable farming.
No, I think like anything, you need a balance. It's a little bit like a human population. You need the wise old heads, that you can learn from, and you need the young thrusters who are going to then, and you can say that the same. A teenage vine is a bit like a teenage son or daughter. It's a little bit all over the place, but it'll come right in the end. So you need, like in any population, you need your teenagers, you need your 40-year-olds, you need your 60-year-olds, and etc.
The balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. But do you see that it becomes a sort of a niche to have the old vines, and the old wines from the old wine vineyards?
Yeah, it depends what style of wines you're looking to produce as well, and what region you're in. So I don't think there's a sort of one size fits all for every wine country or wine region even. But I definitely think there is a place for it in certain climates and certain countries and certain types of wine as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But now, how do you see the future now for the Austrian wine industry?
Well, I think it's a really interesting time. We are different to most wine countries in that the majority of our production is white wine. So we produce about 2/3 white wine, 1/3 red wine, and also some fantastic dessert wines and sparkling wines. But yeah, they're approximately that 1/3, 2/3, so 2/3 white, 1/3 red, and that is actually a good place to be, I think, in the market, because we specialize in it. We celebrate white wines. We make white wines at a very high quality, which means, and that's been interesting for me to discover, is the age worthiness of our white wines. So the ageability of our white wines. So having a 10 or a 15-year-old Grüne Veltliner is a fantastic thing that you don't get to try very often. We also celebrate our white wines. So you see a lot of big format bottles, of white wine. And I think that's quite special. So I think we will always, and we do produce very, very high quality wines, I think, at a fair price as well. And then our red wines are coming through as well. We've got sort of and The exciting thing is also the indigenous grape varieties that we grow in Austria. Many aren't pronounceable at first grasp to, to people who don't speak German, but there's a story there, and there's a lot of interest in that nowadays in terms of in markets. So I think that's also interesting. We have a very strong commitment from our winemakers to organic, sustainable, biodynamic production. As I said, we have one of the highest organic rates. We definitely have the highest biodynamic rates, and we have one of the top sustainability programs that's been, analysed by the Nordic monopolies. So I think, and there's a continued development, and that's something I recognise from New Zealand as well. New Zealand and Austria is similar in that way. There's a constant not sort of sitting on your laurels, but always wanting to push yourself to further improve. So that's always exciting.
Mm. And do you have to adapt for the export market? The wines, or is it very characteristic from Austrian wines that you keep that character?
No, I think the style of our wines is actually very good for the international markets. So fruit driven, maybe a little bit of support of oak, but not predominant. Well made, food friendly wines, and also made in a sort of friendly to the ecologically friendly way. So I think that's certainly an opportunity that we do have.
Mm-hmm. So now, this might be a difficult a question to answer, but what is your favorite? What do you drink?
Well, we don't have favorite children, do we? So, but I do. I must say, just depending at the time. So I drink all types of wines. I will always have a Riesling or a Grüner Veltliner in my fridge to come when I come back from home and have a refreshing glass of wine. It's interesting. My palate has definitely changed. When I was in New Zealand, I was probably drinking 2/3 red wine and 1/3 white wine. And here I definitely drink at least 2/3, if not more, white wines, because the white wines here are super interesting. There's the Vienna gemischte Satz, which you can't really get outside of Vienna, but which is a field blend, all harvested on the same day. So you have all sorts of interesting flavors in the wines. So there's very interesting white wines that I like to drink. And then also, obviously, with a steak, have a Zweigelt or a Blaufränkisch, or even some of the other indigenous varieties. So yeah, it's sort of a bit spoiled for choice. The really interesting thing also is that Vienna, which is this beautiful city, which a lot of people heard of, but not as many people have visited. And then within an hour's drive, you've got pretty much the whole wine industry, and then 2 hours to Styria, Steiermark. And you've got such a very array of very different wine regions, wine styles. As I said, everything from sec to white wines to red wines to dessert wines, all close by. So it's quite from a wine tourism perspective. If you compare that to most other countries where you're having to actually go quite long distances, that's quite exciting as well. So.
Yeah, well, I find it interesting that really with a tram you can go to somewhere and just pop off and go through a vineyard. This is amazing that you find in Vienna.
Well, Vienna does have more hectares of vines and more wineries than any other capital city in the world. And you're right. I love to sort of just put people on a tram and then on a bus, and you're at the top of the hill, and we just walk down into a vineyard and sit down and have a glass of wine and look at the city. It's quite a special place.
Yeah, no, that's true. But thank you so much, Chris. This was very insightful and very interesting what you had to say. And I just one last question: what is your wishes for the future?
My wish for the future, well, global peace would be a good start. I think it's a very unsettling time at the moment in terms of what's having hopefully finally come out of the pandemic and then into the situation we're in. We're very close to it. Obviously, I have friends in New Zealand who all very happy the fact that they're, however many 20,000 kilometers away, and we're a 6-hour drive to the Ukrainian border. So in our neighborhoods, we have many Ukrainian families, and it's incredibly tough for them. So I have less when people start complaining about the price of energy. I said, well, the reason the price of energy is because these poor people have had to leave their country, and so we're going to just have to put up with that sort of stuff, I think. But I think the positive side of it is that a lot of changes have happened that normally take many years, and so my view is in 5 years' time, I think actually we might be in a very good place where we're all using energy much more carefully. We've changed over to green technologies and stuff. So.
Yeah, well, after the pandemic as well, I mean, this very tragic things happened, but there's also many positive things that came out and changes that came out. So I think you're right. In 5 years' time, the world will look a bit different.
Yeah, and I mean, here's a good example. If we're both in the same city, we might either of us might have, traveled 45 minutes and then met up, and then traveled 45 minutes back and used about 3 hours, and now we've had a great conversation in 40 minutes, and bang, we're on to we can also effectively use our time. So, so I think we've all learned new things, which is positive.
And now all this can go out in the world.
Very good.
But Chris, it was really lovely to talk to you, and I hope we can have a glass of wine one day in person.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah. Okay, have a lovely afternoon, and thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.